And joining me now is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and former National Security Council Director of European Affairs, Alexander Vindman. He's now a senior advisor to Vote Vets and author of the upcoming book, The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. That comes out next week. Perfect timing. Colonel, I want to start by playing a warning President Zelensky made on Meet the Press that Putin might invade a NATO state. Watch that.
It can happen in summer, maybe in the beginning, maybe in the end of summer. I do not know when he prepares it, but it will happen. And at that moment, knowing that he did not succeed in occupying us, we do not know where he will go. There are risks that this can be Poland and Lithuania, because we believe that Putin will wage war against NATO.
Zelensky is navigating several audiences here, appealing to Europe, flattering the U.S. president at points in that interview, speaking in English. How is he doing, and will it work?
I think he has an enormous task in front of him. He's talking to folks that are potentially unpersuadable, whether that's Trump or Putin. The most say he has is with European allies that are in fact allies and partners and want to see Ukraine come out on top, Russia taking a loss, so like this, they don't continue to engage in military aggression. Over the course of this next week, we will have really a replay of historical patterns, things I talk about in my book. Each administration, even though this is a return of the Trump administration, has to relearn the same lessons, that Russia is a bad faith actor. Russia is only going to act in response to strength, and resolve will not really give ground with regards to appeasement. The Trump administration has given three things away. They've talked about Ukraine giving territory away. They've talked about Ukraine outside of NATO. And they've talked about these economic concessions for Ukraine to repay the $100 billion that the U.S. has provided, not even addressing the question of future aid. It's kind of good news that we see Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz involved. These are the two kind of true professionals in the Trump administration. They understand what Russia is. Russia's a tough adversary. And starting at the top is another format. It doesn't always have to start at the bottom. But having these two principles and then Trump come in to see if he could quickly achieve a peace talk, that's not going to happen. But he'll learn that lesson, and then we'll see the table reset. Then we might see additional support for Ukraine, heavier sanctions on Russia, because Russia will play with us, but they're not going to give up on their fundamental desire to subdue Ukraine, to bring Ukraine back into the fold. That just has to play out over the course of the next months before the U.S. learns the lessons it needs to and maybe makes the right decisions going forward.
Yeah, that's clearly one of the key pieces here. But I think broadly, there's an understanding that President Trump wants to be seen as the winner. So how can Ukraine use that to its advantage?
That's essential. I think you hear Republicans talking to Trump in that manner. You could clearly see the telltale signs of Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz talking to him in that manner. He wants to be the ultimate winner. He doesn't want Putin to be the winner and the U.S. to be look weak and Trump look like the appeaser. So talking to him in that language is important. I think another part of this is, frankly, something that feeds to Trump's transactional nature. A deal going forward, not to address the aid provided, but going forward where the U.S. invests into access into Ukrainian rare earths is completely viable. A fair deal where the Ukrainians benefit from economic investments, the U.S. gets security with regards to rare earths. That's a fundamental part of that formula. Burden sharing is another part of that formula, with the Europeans stepping up. These are all things that appeal to Donald Trump. This is the case that I'm making over the course of the next weeks with the book and some other articles I've got coming out. This is a way to get the U.S. or the president in the U.S. to see that our play is backing Ukraine, not bending to Russia.
I do just think, speaking broadly here, we are watching a massive shift with the U.S. rebuilding its ties with Russia, perhaps leaving Europe to its own devices. Even the subheading of your book, How the West Deceived Itself About Russia, what is the impact of this kind of a reorientation or a deception, a self-deception, as you describe it?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, according to the data, which is really interesting, it's the fact that we've continuously catered to a Russia first policy that led us to the situation, Russia graduating from malign influence, economic coercion, to hybrid warfare, interfering in, let's say, elections in Europe or Ukraine, to ultimately graduating to military aggression in Georgia and Ukraine, and potentially eyeing NATO. what is the fact is that the reality is, if we show strength, if we hold it to our values, if we understand that our interests are stability, our best, most important trading partner is Europe. Democracies are good partners, and we invest there as opposed to wishful thinking about Russia. That is how we forestall this kind of aggression. So we are seeing the worst case scenario, a doubling down on the biggest mistakes that we made, while we still have an opportunity to potentially pivot to something far more functional. Frankly, maybe a real America First policy, not one that sounds like a slogan that really puts America last.